Everybody's going to see you now looking like an old man in pain, wincing as you sit down.
I'm good.
Are you?
Fine. Yes, because I am a man.
Men.
I am a man.
I don't know why it just reminded me of the. Wasn't that a thing with the Robin Hood Men in Tights? I'm a man.
I don't know, probably. I haven't seen that in a long time. Years. A lot of years.
Yeah.
Oh, look at your socks. They're so bright and colorful. Hey, maybe that's a segment.
We're going to sell that one on OnlyFans. Make us some money.
Maybe that could be a segment. We'll wear funky socks every episode and show them off.
I do wear funky socks every episode. Nobody ever sees them, though.
Mine are not funky.
I only wear funky socks, unless I'm running.
Mine are just reg.
Just regular old lame. What kind of lame life are you living if you're just wearing regular old socks?
They're just regular.
Lame.
Regular.
Hey, guy. Hey. What's up with you? Long time no see.
We literally spent this entire day together. We don't know what we're talking about, huh?
No. Well, we thought we did. We had a topic.
We still could talk about it.
Yeah, we probably will. I thought we probably would, actually.
Since we actually,
there's a part of me that was also sort of like, the fact that we don't want to talk about it, maybe we should talk about it. I don't know.
Yeah, I think maybe that's right.
So, I don't know where we're going to go with it or what we're going to say about it, but yeah.
But yeah, how have I been doing? Was that your question?
Yep.
We've already had the chance to catch up because we've been with each other all day.
Why don't you tell the people how you're doing? They want to know. They saw the way that you were sitting back in that seat. They know how you're doing.
I hurt myself at work.
Yeah, you did.
So, like a real dummy, you know?
Like a real dummy.
Just a real dummy doing real dummy stuff. No, I fell. Had an accident. Tripped. Walking backwards.
You had to
over a pallet.
You had to reset the company's we've been this many days without an accident calendar.
Maybe. I don't know. There's I don't know how long the streak was. So
I know that there was probably some sort of prize that comes along with making it like a full year or 2 years or whatever, and you ruined it for everybody.
Well, they used to do things like that. They don't do that anymore.
Oh yeah, it's 2025. We don't do stuff like that anymore.
Anyway, I had more things to say about that, but I'll just leave it. Leave it at that.
About what, the prizes or the injuring yourself?
About the company.
Oh yeah.
And not doing things.
Yeah, your boss is watching this. Don't say anything.
Probably not, but still. I'll just keep those thoughts to myself.
My boss is aware that this podcast exists. I'm very confident that he's never seen it, but he does know it exists.
Yeah. Pretty sure my bosses don't know.
It's like a secret personality, like a secret identity. You're Clark Kent at work, but after work, you're Superman.
Kinda. So yeah, I hurt my back a little bit, so
just really sore. Goes to show how old you are, because like
speak for yourself.
The story isn't even like, it's not like you took a catastrophic fall off of a thing, like you tripped over a pallet and fell.
Yeah, I fell backwards
and hurt yourself.
Yeah, I may have bruised my coccyx.
I don't want to know anything about
that. Tailbone.
Yeah.
Coccyx. I think that's the
term. I'm not going to talk about anybody hurting their back, because nobody's hurt their back more than me.
Yeah. Yeah. At least mine was, I guess, an accident. I mean, yours is technically an accident too, but
yeah, most of mine come from weightlifting injuries.
Right.
So that's what I did tell Kelly, actually, when she told me about your back. I said,
you knew the risks.
Just tell him that get ready for it to happen all the time now, because it seems like once I pulled my back, now just ever so often I do it, and it's the same place every time. So it's like, I don't know if there's some sort of weakness that's built up there from pulling it or whatever, but like it just, now it becomes more and more and more easy to do it. So
well, see, so I actually have had something not this is actually worse than that, but I have actually had this kind of thing happen before,
Yeah.
and it happened from deadlifting.
Yeah.
But it's been a while since I've hurt myself lifting like that, but it's also been a while since I've lifted consistently, so there you go.
Correlation, not causation.
Yeah,
Something like that.
something like that.
As the scientists say. I'm somewhat of a scientist myself.
Yeah, it's actually been really aggravating because I've been really I've been trying to get back into I'm eating good and have this routine with lifting and all this, and I'm sticking to it, and I did it for like a week, and then I got the flu,
Yeah.
dealt with that, and then I kind of
Was
got
right on death's doorstep.
yeah, then I got off track, and then it seems like every time I have like a full week where I'm like doing good, something happens, and that happened again this week when I
Yeah.
hurt my back. So
So is life.
yeah,
So is life.
it'd be like that.
It do be like that.
But outside of that, I'm great. Good.
Yeah, it's been a fine week, I guess. This has been literally the most boring week for me. I mean, I'm kind of getting now into a routine because basketball's done. Well, I mean, they've got tournament and stuff, but my portion of basketball's done. We didn't have any this week. And of course, football season's over. So this is like the first week since August, the first week of August that I didn't have anything to do.
Yeah.
So other than just work and be me.
Right.
So it was kind of a weird week in that regard, trying to find like that normalcy that hasn't been there. So
Yeah.
it's been kind of a standard week, I guess. Yeah. Nothing going on.
Yeah.
Sometimes boring's good though, you know? When you always have stuff going on, it's kind of nice to just have that like moment in time where you're like able to just sit down for a minute and you're like, what am I going to do with this time that I have? This is not something I'm used to having, you know?
Yeah.
So,
Right.
yeah, but I don't have anything, man. That's what actually part of the topic. So, to just to fill in the audience on the backstory of what was going on with the topic. So we thought we had a topic, and I guess maybe we're still going to talk about it. But it was one of those things that kind of came up in other conversations that we'd had. Not really like engaged in conversation with us necessarily, but we just happened to be there and hear some things that others were saying and thought, hey, you know, why don't we talk about that? And that was works specifically, you know, like works, talking about faith versus works or just works in general. And then it kind of went along with the theme because today we actually served, our church did a local ministry where they, I don't even like, is ministry the right word for that? I don't know.
Sure.
But we just offered a free community meal. So, you know, within our county, we had about 4 or 5 different teams that went to 4 or 5 different towns within the county, posted up, and we handed out soup and sandwiches just for free. And that's why I said I don't know if ministry is the right word because it's not like we were trying to preach the gospel to them in words or whatever. We were literally just trying to give food away. You know what I mean? So,
What's St. Francis say
yeah,
about it?
right, exactly. So, that's why I wasn't sure how people would understand it. You know what I mean? That's kind of
Yeah.
what we did today. We did that for a few hours. We posted up and set up a table and a tent and handed out soups and sandwiches and, you know, spent a few hours doing that. And that's kind of a work in a way, I guess you could say. Some people would label it that. So I thought that maybe our mind frame would be around the topic based on what we'd heard others talk about and our experience from today. And then we got here today and was like, I don't know that I even really care about talking about that. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, as you're talking through that, I actually do think that there's some good things to talk about there. I don't know if we want to get into it yet or not, but
I mean, you go right ahead.
because so the reference I was making
Yeah.
was St. Francis of Assisi, I think is who it is
Yep.
that said it. preach the gospel always, and when necessary, use words.
Yep.
Something like that, right?
Yep.
So, like, that, I mean, so then what is the gospel? And that's something that me and you talked about a little bit earlier is like,
Right. The good
you know,
news.
yeah, whenever Jesus is proclaiming the good news, what is he proclaiming? He's proclaiming this is good news for the poor. It's good news the for the stranger. This is good news for those held captive. It's release to the captives. You know,
Right.
what is the quotation that he reads where he opens up Isaiah and he
Isaiah,
reads from
yeah.
the scroll? Do you remember what the quotation is?
I don't remember the quotation. I just remember he said that this day this has been fulfilled or whatever, but I don't remember specifically what he
He
read.
says, I guess I'm just going to try to look it up. I know that he says, um, release of the captives,
Yeah.
proclaim good news. Um, it's Isaiah 61. I know that. Yeah. Which, by the way, after he says this in the synagogue, they try to kill him.
Right.
So
There's a lot of
there's that.
cool things to glean from that because that's one thing, and also he quits reading mid verse and seemingly omits a I don't know controversial, I guess you would say, part of the verse,
Yeah.
and that seems to be why, or part of. I don't want to say that seems to be why, but it seems to be perhaps something that irritates people.
Yeah. Well, so in Luke 4, um, the quotation it says in this, um, and he came to Nazareth. I'll just start at the verse 16 here. And he came to Nazareth where he had been brought up. So he's coming to like his hometown here.
Right.
This is where he was brought up, and as was his custom, which I think that's actually an important detail that we miss. Like,
Yeah.
this was his custom. Like, Jesus wasn't like Jesus was a practicing Jew. Like, this was part of his custom. This was like his, like, I think it's kind of easy, I think, for us in our current context, curtain, like, especially being this far removed, like, because the Christian religion has been a thing for so long. I think we can mistake Jesus for a Christian,
Oh yeah. Sure.
you know.
Absolutely.
But that's not what's going on in this text. It
Right.
tells you outright this was his custom, but he was in the synagogue
Right.
because this is what he did. This is he as a good Jew. This is what he did.
Right. Which is kind of an aside to that, and this because this is probably just me. It's no, I've never heard it taught this way before, but for whatever reason in my mind, I always sort of envisioned it as like this is the first time he showed up. Like he'd never been before and just showed up and just started wreaking havoc like this all of a sudden. But
Right?
like no, it literally says this was his custom. He did this all the time. So
Yeah. This is where he was brought up, and this as was his custom, he went to the synagogue on the Sabbath day, and he stood up to read. And the scroll of the prophet Isaiah was given to him. He unrolled the scroll and found the place where it was written, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim liberty to the captives, and recovering of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." And he rolled up the scroll and gave it back to the attendant and sat down. And the eyes of all in the synagogue were fixed on him. And he began to say to them, "Today this scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing." So, good news to the poor,
to the blind,
to the blind, to the oppressed,
captive.
and to the captive. I mean, and I'm not trying to like I don't know, part of me feels weird kind of saying this, but like if we're providing meals for people who need them, who like genuinely need them, how is that not good news received by those people?
Right.
Right?
Right.
Like that is literally spreading the gospel. The gospel is exactly what Jesus laid out here. It's good news. And it's good news for those who need some good news,
Yeah, absolutely.
which in turn is bad news for those who are the oppressors or the ones that you
Right.
know,
Yeah.
the ones
The ones
that
the ones who benefit from there being a separation of the have and have-nots, for sure.
yeah, those who are master to those held captive,
Right.
right? Like
Absolutely.
that's the good news isn't always
Fr-
received as good news to everybody.
freedom of, all the slaves in the United States of America when it happened was not good news to the slave owners.
Exactly. Yeah.
It was fantastic news to the slaves, but not
Right.
the slave owners.
Right. And so I mean, and that's not to say that the gospel, the good news, isn't for everyone, because the gospel is for everyone.
Right.
But it's it can be
Hell.
well. I mean, yeah. I mean, Jesus says it outright. He says it's harder for a rich man to enter into heaven than it is for a camel to
Right.
enter through the needle of an eye, like
Well,
eye of a needle.
the way that you phrased it there made me literally think of hell, because if we picture hell as a type of burning away the wood, hay, and stubble, the unchristlike things, or however you want to phrase it, but it burns away those parts of you that need to be refined. Then, like, we do think that the gospel is for everybody. It is good news for everybody, but until that stuff is burned away, it's not going to feel like good news.
Right. Yeah.
That gospel's going to feel like hell until you're refined, and then you come to the realization that it is good news for all.
Right.
You know,
Yeah. Including you who it didn't feel like good news for at first.
right? I mean, and it just depends on, like, how you want to phrase it, I guess. But like, if you're living out of a false identity, or your false self, perhaps, then the gospel, the murder of your false self, your false identity, may not be pleasant, may not feel like good news, but it will set you free in the end.
Right. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. Which is why you can't really separate works from the gospel
right?
in a sense. I mean, you know, like to because how the idea of the gospel being good news to the poor are those just empty words if we as his body aren't going and bringing goodness to them, bringing good news to them?
Right.
Like,
Why is there so much mention of the poor, if I mean, it has to have something to do with that, right?
right.
Like,
And so I mean, you can't separate. I mean, this is the point that I think James is making, right? Because I mean, depending on how you read it, and I mean, you could, some people could read Paul and read James and think that they're contradicting each other, and maybe they are.
right.
But
Yeah,
like,
there's actually a guy that posts a lot of YouTube videos. I've watched several of them, and I mean, I think a lot of his content is pretty compelling, actually. But his name is Aaron Abke, and he talks a lot about that, about Paul and James, how there was a rivalry between the two that you can see in their writings. And
yeah, I mean, and James says it explicitly, like it's care for the widow, the orphan, the stranger. Like you, faith without works is dead, right?
right,
Like you, the reason being is because all of this is tied in with the gospel. And how is the gospel good news to the poor if you don't go out and bring good news to them?
right,
You know,
right,
is it like that's what's so frustrating about reducing the gospel to like It's only about like I say this prayer and I'm good.
Right.
Like I'm going to heaven. I purchased my ticket and that's it. There's nothing else. Like because it's so much more than that.
Or even when we reduce it down to just believing the right things,
Right, yeah.
as if you can control the things that you believe,
Right.
like
Right, which all that goes back to like one thing I mentioned last week about the orthos, right? The three
mhm,
orthos,
right.
orthodoxy, orthopraxy, and I still don't remember the third one.
I don't either. We didn't look that one up.
Right. Right belief, right action, and right emotions, you know? Like if it's you can't just have right beliefs and because in one sense if you think you have right beliefs, but your actions and your emotions aren't in line with that, then do you have the right beliefs?
Right.
Like they all are interconnected, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, I don't know if that's but the belief thing, that made me think about that thing that I had mentioned to you earlier about which is a kind of a tangent and a little bit different, but about the right beliefs. Well, actually, it was the word they used was doctrine, but
Right,
I
right
think
doctrine. Yeah.
I think that this is sort of in line.
Yeah.
It's a little bit off of a tangent, but it's sort of in line. But I watched a TikTok video, and it was like a preacher who's like sort of a quote unquote holiness preacher. We're talking about like your old school independent, IFB or Pentecostal, where they're women wear skirts, men dress a certain way, clean shaven, all this. And he was telling a story about like how their local, I don't know if it was like a drug rehab or halfway house or whatever, like the people came to their church to visit for a week and how they felt uncomfortable because it seemed like the congregants were casting judgment on them because like the women weren't wearing skirts and the guys had earrings and tattoos and blah blah
Right.
blah. And the preacher was the one who was up here saying this, so it's not me. It was their own preacher that was in saying this. And he basically was saying that like before we can worry about straightening out people's doctrine, we have to love them. They need love. They're I think I know I'm going to mess up the quote, but he said something about like they're not worried about right doctrine. They're trying to keep a needle out of their arm. You know what I mean? Like we've got
Right.
to you got to get these people to a place to where they can even worry about doctrine in the first place, which is goes back
Right.
to feeding people. If somebody's hungry, if they're worried about where they're going to get their next meal,
Yeah.
they can't. I mean, who cares about what they believe or what you believe? Or these people are only concerned about they don't have time or anything to worry about doctrine or beliefs. They're just worried about where they're going to eat.
Right.
And
And
he was talking about how, like a lot of those people now go to this other church down the road because and the way he talked about it was they felt like they're a church that has wrong doctrine, but those other people attend church there because they felt more loved and accepted there, and one of the
yeah.
comments when I clicked on it, because I've said it on the podcast before, I don't know why I always do that. I always look at the comments, but
It's usually a bad idea.
yeah, it is maybe. I mean, yeah,
It depends on if you're
you got to be in the right headspace for
right.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah. But one of the first comments said uh there is no right there is no love without right doctrine. And I was like, that is so backwards to me. Literally 180 degrees backwards, because to me there is no right doctrine without love.
Yeah.
It's exactly the opposite.
Right. I mean, because what we're talking about when we talk about right doctrine is we're talking about like correct theological beliefs,
Right.
right? So, like, I mean, if we're just talking about God and God's relation to the world and us and creation and all of that, like if that's what we mean by right doctrine is believing the right things about all that, well, God is love.
Right.
I mean, that seems like a good place to start,
Right. Yeah.
you know? And if that's true, like if that's true that God is not that like God is capable of loving if you do the right things, or God loves some of us, but not all of us, or whatever. No, like it says that God is love. That means that anything that we say about God, anything we say about God's relation to creation and to us, it has to have love
Right.
intertwined in it somehow.
Exactly.
Like it has to come back to love, or it's not God,
Right.
because God is love.
Right.
It's,
Yeah.
you would think it would be that simple, but so as you can like demonstrate by going to Calvin's institutes, like we'll go to great lengths to ignore that passage
Right.
and just keep it out of our doctrines,
Right.
which is insane.
I think the whole topic of works becomes a weird thing, at least within our, I don't even want to say our, at least within my lived experience, in my background, just because of it's tied to salvation
Yeah,
and or the opposite of that, right? Like the opposite but equal reaction. So like people who have grown up to where works were so tied into the idea of salvation, the tendencies to either wholesale accept that or to completely reject it to the point of like now we're uncomfortable even talking about doing works at all,
right.
you know?
Yeah,
So but that's a huge conversation in and of itself, because then you're talking about like salvation, like what does that mean to say salvation, and what all's included within that conversation,
right.
so that's a big one. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, we've we've talked about salvation
Right.
several times on the pod, and don't think we've ever nailed it.
I don't expect us to ever nail it, to be honest with you.
So,
People should know that by now.
yeah, but yeah, I mean, because again, I think it has to be more than just escaping punishment, right?
Yeah.
So, like, if that's what we're reducing it to, is like, well, you have to do good things to escape punishment. Eh, I don't know.
Right.
I mean, to some extent, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I mean,
I mean,
maybe it's part of that refinement. Maybe that's why it's so hard to reduce things down to a such a universal right and wrong for every single person, right? Because for some people, maybe it is a means of salvation. Maybe that is a part of their wood, hay, and stubble that needs to be burned away, and they have to go through that as a means of refining. You know what I mean?
right.
And for others, they don't. So I mean, I don't know. I've never even thought about that before until just this moment. So maybe that sounds stupid, but
Well, like, it's just an interesting thing to think about, like, because if you didn't have anything that Paul wrote, right? If you just had the Gospels to go off of, a lot of what Jesus says sounds pretty worksy.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, even the sheep and the goats, the classic, like whenever you start talking about universal salvation, like Christian universalism, people will automatically throw that. Well, hold on, buddy.
Matthew 25,
What about Matthew 25 and the sheep and the goats? Well, if you read it, then what you're saying is you're saved by your care for the poor, those imprisoned,
right?
then like
The sick,
feeding the hungry,
needy.
clothing the naked, like
I mean, really, now that you think about it, I don't know how much of Jesus's ministry, his earthly ministry, is actually addressing what you believe or your doctrine. I'm
I
not
mean, it's
saying
all about belief in him.
I don't know that and I don't say that meaning that he never talks about it.
Right.
I'm just kind of posing the question. Like when you think about it, it does seem to be most of what he talks about and lives out is living life here on earth, here in the now, from a place of agape love for the other,
Yeah.
serving others.
I mean, anytime he talks about belief, it's always about believing in him. It's not about believing like right. Like you have to have the right eschatology, you have to have the right atonement
Right.
theory, you have to have all these like
You have to
doctrines
you have
worked
to
out.
perfectly understand the Trinity,
Right.
or you're out, buddy.
Yeah. Yeah, none of that is ever mentioned. The only time Jesus mentions belief, it's always about belief in him,
Right.
you know?
Right.
And so, but even that is like, well, what does that mean?
Right.
What does it mean to believe in Jesus? Does that, because there's so many different ways you can take that. Like, even the demons believe in tremble, right? That's also in James' writing, isn't it? And
I don't remember if it's in James, but it's definitely in Scripture somewhere.
yeah, because I think it's in James somewhere. But like, even because like if belief is if we're going to reduce that down to like whenever we say belief in Jesus, like you could reduce that down to like, was he a historical figure that actually lived?
Right.
Like, is that what it means to believe in Jesus? To believe he was a real person that actually lived and actually said and did the things that are in the Gospels?
Right.
Like, is that what it means to believe in Jesus? Like, does it mean to believe in Jesus? Does that mean to believe in what he did, as in like that he did go to the cross and die and resurrect? Like, is that what it means to believe in him? Well, he's talking about people believing him through his whole life, and to me, I think maybe more than anything else, what he means is like, believe me when I tell you this.
Yeah.
Like when I say, go and heal the sick, like go and visit people that are sick and go and visit people that are in prison and clothe the naked, feed the hungry. Believe me when I tell you, you need to do that.
Right.
Like, I mean, and that's a hard pill to swallow.
Yeah. It is hard.
Especially, again, it's
Some would
not good news for everybody.
some would call it a narrow way, perhaps.
Right,
You know?
right. It's not good news for everybody.
Right. It is just an interesting conversation because I think about my concept, the way that I currently conceive of the fall of man, and basically the whole story is sort of the starting point of my process of theology, which is obviously subject to change, but the way that I currently hold it, which is I've already mentioned it on, a few different episodes, but basically, like, I think that we kind of have missed the boat with the fall. Is like for whatever weird reason, a lot of people think that, like, because they ate the apple, that's the fall. And, like, I actually believe the fall, the eating of the fruit, it was actually never an apple. It doesn't say apple, it's fruit. But
Right, yeah.
the eating of the fruit is just the result of the fall, right?
It's
Like,
probably a mango.
maybe mango would be a little more appealing than an apple to me, but.
Right.
But anyway, like, to me, the eating of the fruit is just the result of the fall. It's not the fall itself or the catalyst. The fall is believing the delusion of the serpent, the lie, which is essentially that God is holding out on us, that we're not already included in the perichoretic union with God, that you have to do something to make yourself very good, right?
Right.
Eat of the fruit and your eyes will be opened and you will be like God. But, like,
Yeah.
if you're already existing in union with God, there's nothing that you can do to make yourself more worthy of being in union with God, or make yourself more acceptable, or more, whatever other word you want to put in there. So to me, that's the way that I conceptualize the fall. It was believing that lie, and it planted that seed of doubt in man's soul. And it just kind of, the story that the Bible tells, that the Old Testament tells, for me, kind of starts there, and it goes from there to Cain and Abel, which is to me, the first story of religion. Like, God never asked for an offering or a sacrifice, but they both brought one. Well, if we're both trying to make ourselves acceptable before God, only one of us can be, because if mine's better than yours, then you're not accepted. Or if yours is better than mine, then mine's not accepted. So it's man trying to make themselves acceptable to God. You know what I mean? So, like, from that perspective and with that understanding, this idea of works can become a slippery slope of, like, you're just trying to make yourself acceptable to God. And I think if that's the mind frame or the heart posture that you're approaching works from, I still
Right.
think um it's not in the right spirit, perhaps, is maybe the right word to say it, or it's not serving the purpose that you think it is. There's nothing that we can do to make ourselves more accepted by God. There's nothing that
Right.
we can do to make ourselves more loved by God. And it's not, and I want to emphasize that I'm not saying that from the hyper way that, like, God is so holy that he can't even look upon our sins and we're such filthy, disgusting worms. No, what I'm saying is God already loves you so much that there is nothing that you can do to make yourself more loved. There is nothing that you can do to make yourself more in union with God, because you already are. Mankind already has been, always, from the beginning. We're enemies at God, at enmity in our mind. It's a delusion that has to be overcome, in my opinion. Again, all of this is just my opinion. So, when from that perspective, I bring all that up just simply to say that, like, this works thing, if it's coming from a place of trying to prove myself worthy, trying to make myself acceptable to God, trying to make myself more loved by God, even though I don't think very many people would believe like that, I do think that that's kind of at the root of where that comes from. I don't think that that's right. Like, I don't think there's anything that we can do to make ourselves more acceptable to God. We're already accepted,
Right.
in my opinion.
Yeah. So like I agree with all of that, except I do think that there is something that is so this is actually a thought that I had first time. So we're just gonna throw it out there. We're just gonna try it out. And
Not the soundtrack to you, but you said first time. That's two, buddy.
huh?
You said first time.
I held up two fingers. Well, anyway, so I had a thought, and anyway, um, the no, I don't remember what it was.
It worked.
Were you trying to sidetrack me?
No.
No, it was because you said you mentioned not just loved and accepted, but you mentioned
At Union.
union with.
Yes.
Right. So like going back to the sheep and the goats, whatever you did or didn't do to the least of these, you did not do to me.
Right.
So if I don't go to him and clothe the naked and feed the hungry, etc., like am I not in one sense alienating myself from him?
Yes.
I mean, yes, he's in you also,
Right.
but in another sense, maybe that is part of that. I think that's part of being in union with Christ
Right.
is seeing Christ in everyone and uniting yourself to them in that way, in mediating God's goodness to to all of creation. And part of what that is bringing the good news, right? To
Right.
mediate God's goodness to creation would be to bring to uh, take the good news of the gospel and bring it to those who are in need.
Right. Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I guess the way that I would view it, maybe to give like a little bit of life to the way I would say it, with an analogy, I would sort of view that from the perspective of, like, let's just say that I refuse to accept that I am in the United States of America. I believe wholeheartedly that I am in
Denmark.
Denmark. I refuse to speak English. I'm only speaking Danish.
Right.
I'm only going to use their currency.
Yeah.
Everything, every aspect of my life is lived from the perspective that I'm Danish living in Daneland, or Daneland, Denmark. Daneland for in Denmark. So from that perspective, like, my actions don't reflect the reality that I am in the United States of America. And from that perspective, I guess I say all that to just say, like, I think that if we just open our eyes and realize where we're at, we're already at union with God. But we don't we kind of float. Maybe another way to say it is we're flowing against the current, but we're still in the current, but we're flowing against it because we refuse to flow with it. You know what I mean? Or like, because I refuse to accept the fact that I'm in the United States of America, I live my life as if I'm in Denmark, but that doesn't make it a reality. That's still a delusion. You know what I mean?
Right.
So I guess that's sort of the way that I would frame that, is that
Yeah.
we are at union with God. We always have been from the very beginning. But because we've said it in a million different episodes, our delusions become realities. If we believe a lie and we live out our existence from a place of a lie, from a delusion, then that delusion affects real life. It becomes a reality. You know what I mean? So I don't think that there's anything that we can do to increase our union with God, but I believe that when we open our eyes and understand that where we're at, then we flow with that current more. Like You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That we live from that place of union rather than live from the place of delusion that we're not. And as far as works go, I think that factors right into that, because once we open our eyes to that, I don't think we're not at that point we're not trying to produce works to make ourselves acceptable. The works just happen because we want to help other people, because we're living from this place of union with God. You know what I mean?
Yeah. But even in saying that, you don't always. I don't always live from that place of union,
Right.
because sometimes I live in my own selfishness and my own ego and my own pride and all those
Absolutely.
things, that prevent me from going to the ones on the outside,
Right. I die
you
daily.
know.
It's a daily.
Yeah.
I think that perhaps is something that we maybe have to be cognizant of. It's like we want to think it's like, I've just got to align myself this one time. Now I'm in the current. I'm good to go. Like, no, this is every moment that we live life is a new moment. We have to constantly be, because our mind's always working. You know what I mean? Like we're always.
Yeah.
We are, as long as we exist in this fleshly body, we're always going to be every moment. I die daily. It's a
Yeah.
constant process.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
or at least that's what I think, and who knows.
Yeah. There was a scripture that came to mind earlier whenever you were talking about everyone being in union, because I was thinking about God was in Christ, reconciling the world to himself, not counting our sins against us. So this is a past tense thing that's already happened. We've already been reconciled.
Right.
So, and if he was the lamb slain before the foundation of the world, then, and if God exists outside of time, then haven't we always been reconciled?
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like,
That's
even
what that's
though,
what I believe, but
right. It's just one of those trippy things that, like, I don't think we think about enough, and it's like, because what I just explained there is that Jesus shows up in the middle of time, but changes all of time at once.
yeah, you have to. I mean, I
Or
guess.
creates all of time in himself in that moment. Which goes back to the thing that I didn't get to finish saying to you earlier about the virgin birth, but we don't have to go into that if there's more work stuff to talk about.
I mean, we can go into it if we want. But we'll have to give some background because none of the people are going to have any idea what we're talking about.
Yeah.
But
Well, it was just like we were just upstairs talking before we came down here to record, and
yeah.
I had mentioned that you said something that made me think of, oh, you were talking about some of the historicity of the gospels and stuff like that, and like,
Oh yeah, yeah. So the main context was we were talking about being uncomfortable with things. Not even, I don't like the word questioning because that seems like a negative phrase, but just like critically analyzing some of the things that occurred in the biblical text, but specifically in the Gospels, because those
right,
are red letter things. You know what I mean?
yeah.
Like,
And that made me think about the virgin birth,
yeah,
because that's something I had been kind of thinking about recently, as you do, in March.
of course.
But
Which, and anybody that's listened to us in the past have known that's something that's came up a few different times. That's one
yeah,
of the things that I've wrestled with in the past, as far as like, I don't know what to, I mean, even today, I would give you a very weird answer because I don't know what I think about that.
right. So, like, what made me think about this right now was what I said about, like, Jesus shows up in the middle of time, but is also somehow the Alpha and the Omega, the one slain before the foundations of the world, and how that is like, so, and he is the one that, according to John, was there in the beginning with God and was God, and nothing came into being, that there was nothing made without him. Like, he spoke all things into existence. Like, this is the word. And this word is this Palestinian Jew that shows up in the middle of time, but is somehow the Alpha and the Omega. And so, and just the idea of creation and him being the creator and the created all at once, all of these like opposites that don't seem how they could be possibly true at the same time. and like the virgin birth being along those same lines. Like it's what are they what's that called, the coincidence of opposites or something like that, like there being these two things that seemingly can't be true, both of them be true, but they somehow are. And so but if you and how like what I was talking about was I was listening to a conversation between Jordan Daniel Wood and Chris Green, and they were talking a little bit about the virgin birth, and how, like, and something that Jordan said kind of made a lot of sense to me. Essentially, he said, like, the virgin birth isn't, and this as I understood him, maybe I don't want to speak, but like as I understood what he said, it was that the virgin birth isn't even necessarily something that you have to say 100%, that like you could point to it some like in history and it be like something that you could prove, something that you could like physically prove, but it like it's that's not what makes it important. What makes it important is the theological implications of it. And so what I didn't get to finish telling you up there was, like, there's so many correlations between Mary and what happens with Mary and what happens with the church and what happens in creation. Like the whole idea of creation from nothing, the creatio ex nihilo, right? It's like that doesn't make any sense. Creation from nothing. But if there's no thing in her and yet there's creation there, like that is a connection to the very creation, to the very beginning that he is, right? And um her and she's like a type of the church, and in a way the first one among all of us who say yes, that give our yes, you know? Like if Mary had not said yes, like would Jesus have been here? You know, whenever the angel comes to her and says, like,
Right.
and she says, like, let it be done to me according as to what
As,
you've said,
yeah,
you know, as you've
as
said.
you said. Yeah.
Like that is she's the first one to give her yes to the Lord in that way, right? And and so as a type for us as the church, the first one to say yes to having Christ born in us and coming into new creation, right?
Yeah.
I know you have a lot of stuff that I mean, you're probably disagreeing with all that, but this is just something that I was thinking through, and it made a lot of sense to me. There's just a lot of really cool stuff in Mary's story, I think.
I don't really think it's. I mean, I wouldn't be willing to say I disagree with any of it. I do think I would want to listen to. Not that you didn't do it justice, but I think I would want to listen to the full conversation. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Because yeah, sure. Like,
I just think that there's some really cool. I think one thing that made it more cool to me is like, I've said this kind of jokingly before, but it really is kind of my childish conception of it growing up was kind of like what made us special as Pentecostals was that we weren't Baptist or Catholic, right? And it is like I know that
they're not like us. Not like us.
right.
Little Kendrick Lamar for you.
So like it to me, it was like it was very like just sort of, I mean, I was a child, so it was very childish,
Right.
like childish distinctions to make. But like we're not Baptist because they believe in that whole once saved always saved thing, and that's all obviously not true. And those Catholics, well, they're kind of weird about Mary. We're not like that. So it was like I had these just very like just
They drink wine too.
right.
Can't have that. Lord knows, can't have that.
Right. So there was these differences in like the different traditions and like things that like I was like, oh well, this makes us separate as Pentecostals from these people and from those people and
Right.
those people, and like So I think it's interesting to me coming from that Pentecostal background where like there was no attention given to Mary at all.
Yeah.
Like Mary's I mean, and not that anyone would ever say it this way, but in a sense, it's almost like we kind of like discard Mary. She was just kind of a thing used to bring Jesus.
Right. She's a pretty important part of the story for like 2 chapters
Right.
and then just totally forgotten.
Right.
Yeah.
But there's so much in Mary's story that is beautiful in that tells us something. I think if we're paying attention to it, I think it tells us so much about creation itself and tells us
Yeah.
about us and about our the proper response
Right. Yeah, I agree 100%
to
with that.
Jesus and to the call of God on our lives, you know?
So you know what the takeaway from that is? You people need to start giving more respect to Mary.
Yeah, exactly. No, but like,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, there's more stuff I could say that I think is really cool about Mary's story, but
It is really cool, and that I'm absolutely agree with. Actually, 100. Yeah, there's different ways to conceptualize all that theologically,
yeah,
but the
right,
point. I think the point still stands the same. I mean, I listened recently to a book by Marianne Williamson, who, if you don't know who it is, look her up. If you're from a conservative Christian background, you're not going to agree with her. You know,
right,
but her most recent book is called The Mystic Jesus, and she has a whole section in there about like the nativity narrative and the virgin birth and Mary in particular and what she represents. And I found it all really compelling, to be honest. I thought it was really cool. I mean, and it goes right along exactly with what you're saying. She just conceptualizes a bit differently,
right,
but the themes are the same of what you're saying, which is cool. Which I love
right,
too, because one of my big things is always finding that the truth within that's universal to, like, you can conceptualize this uh from whatever background you're coming to it from, whether you're Baptist, Catholic, New Age, whatever religion you belong to, this one theme, and we find that like stream that is in agreement. I love finding that stuff. So I
yeah,
think that's real cool for me personally. But
yeah,
anyway, as you were talking, I actually had a sidebar that was unrelated to virtually all of that, but
okay,
but not. I was listening to everything you said. It come from something you said, which was um, the whole set apart thing, holy and being set apart, and how like your conception of that used to be being as a Pentecostal, and I don't want to speak for you or anybody else that comes from that background, but like a lot of what I observed in my life would be like set apart from like your worldly appearance and your worldly as far as like you dress differently and you
right,
talk differently and all of this. And it's just so weird how like there come a time in my life within my deconstruction where like there was a point where I was like that too. I thought that there was a godly way to live your life that was like based upon like what you dressed, what kind of music you listened to, what you watched on TV, blah blah blah. You know what I mean? But then I became, because I've said before, I tend to have this overreaction to any sort of reaction. Then I went completely the opposite direction to where I was like, there's no such thing.
right,
Now where I'm at in my life with that is I actually do think that there is a living set apart and holy, but it has nothing to do with the clothes you wear, the like
right,
music you listen to. It's love.
right, yeah,
Like living from a place of love sets you apart, because we've talked about it. It's going to be something that we talk about every episode, so get used to it. But it's the upside down kingdom, the upside
yeah,
down to to the kingdom of God based upon love. The world is completely upside down.
yeah,
So like if you're living from a place of love, you're separate from the world, man. Totally.
right. Jesus said, they will know you're my disciples by your love."
Exactly. So like I don't it, and again, even in saying that, people would describe love however they conceptualize it. You know what I mean? So like it's going to look different for each and every person. But I don't think it had, personally, now I've come back to sort of the middle where I do believe that you are holy and set apart, and there's a holy way to live your life, and that's a way of love for other, you know?
Right. Yeah.
Which again is a complete sidebar, but you said that about the being separate, and it just for whatever reason stood out to me.
Yeah. Yeah, which, that, I mean, that is all, it actually is all related, because I'm still thinking about Mary and her story, and like all that is related, like,
Yeah.
because I mean, it's not just, I mean, because one thing you said there was like, even love has to be like, well, it depends on your conception of love, but like scripturally, the word agape is
Right.
typically is used there, and what that means is self-sacrificing, self-giving, other-centered
Right.
love. So like, in doesn't Mary exemplify that
Yeah.
perfectly? You
Absolutely.
know, like think about the what people her rep. She's putting her reputation. She's putting like Joseph also is taking up this great responsibility and caring for this child that, according to the tradition at least, is not his.
Right.
You know, and he never says a word. you know,
Right.
and it's the so she. I mean, she is exemplifying,
Yeah. I mean,
I think,
depending,
self-sacrifice.
not to take the spotlight off of Mary, but like if you, depending on how literally you take all that story, Joseph needs more credit than
Oh,
he gets too. Not that
yeah, yeah,
he doesn't need more credit than Mary. It's not a Joseph
right,
versus
yeah,
Mary competition. But if we're going to talk about Mary not getting enough credit, we also got to throw Joseph in there too,
yeah,
because
for
my
sure,
man was like, first of all, he finds out his girl's pregnant, and he was like,
yeah,
you know what? I'm just going to divorce her quietly. I'm not going to make a scene about this
yeah,
because I'm a good guy. We're not going to do that. But
right,
then he gets a dream, or an angel appears to him in a dream, as it says, tells him not to divorce her because this is, God's plan or whatever the exact wording was. And he just wakes up and was like, all right, let's go with it.
yeah.
I mean, man,
I mean, yeah, I mean, but it's a lot of faith, and that's a lot of like potential for self-sacrifice, and like,
yeah,
and I mean, it is interesting that like, I mean, Joseph apparently dies at some point prior to,
something happens to him.
yeah, and yeah, I don't know. There's so much that I think is really interesting, um, in that story. Like whenever uh, they forget it, like they realize Jesus ain't with us anymore. Where's he at?
Right.
And Mary finds him. They find him in the temple, and he's like talking to the people there, and uh, even then he spoke as someone with authority,
Right.
you know, and he says to Mary, like why are you basically like why are you looking for me? Like, don't you know that it's like I must be about my father's business, right?
Right.
And
It I've never actually realized it until this very moment that you said that, but it's kind of funny in contrast to that to like his first miracle of creating water into wine, right? Because in that
right,
scenario, he's a child and he's trying to go ahead with his father's work and saying,
yeah,
don't you know I have to be about my father's work? But then you fast forward to his adulthood and his
yeah,
mother asks him to perform this miracle and he's like, "Wait a minute. Don't you know my
it's not my
time hasn't
time.
come yet?"
Yeah, yeah,
It's just a really weird contrast there.
exactly. And I think it's intentional.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's something to that. Um, but yeah, I don't. That kind of reminds me of like something that there's a line there in that story where it says that like after she finds him there in the temple, and he never disobeyed again according to the story, and like and he grew in wisdom,
Yeah.
I think is what it says. But what it says about Mary is that she treasured these things in her
In her
heart.
heart. Yeah.
That's that's a really cool detail in the story.
Yeah.
And this is something else that I heard, like I think it was Chris that said it, that I think is like that I think is spot on, and it's something that have recognized within myself, but like I think we're too quick to, because like if you have some like crazy experience, some sort of like crazy spiritual experience, like I think a lot of us want to rush to tell everybody about it.
Right.
Like, oh, I got this vision, or I heard this, I got this word, or whatever it is, and like it's like this really cool experience, and I think there's a lot of something that we want to rush out and tell someone about it immediately
Right.
without taking time to ponder it,
Yeah.
to treasure it in our heart, to not immediately jump to conclusions about what this means and doesn't mean and then go and tell everybody about it, but to like sit with it for a while and stew on it and contemplate on it. And it may be that you don't tell anybody about it, or you don't even understand what it means for another 10, 20, 30 years. Who knows how long you have to treasure it in your heart before you understand the meaning of it,
Right.
you know?
I've had to be conscious of that actually. This exact thing is something that I've, thought of myself and
Yeah.
been conscious of myself because I am like that too. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not immune, I'm
Right.
just like that. When I get a revelation, when the veil is pulled back a little bit and I get a fresh revelation, the first thing I want to do is tell somebody,
Yeah.
usually you. I mean,
Yeah.
but sometimes I need to just ponder it.
Yeah.
So,
Sometimes. And some of the times I don't, it's not necessarily that you have to even ponder it alone, maybe, but ponder it. Like, but so like something I was just thinking about is like, even in that language of like, a revelation or like what came to mind for me was like a pulling back of the curtain
right,
where there's like a burst of light. That light does illuminate, but if you're in darkness and someone turns on the light real bright, there's also like it's a little disorienting.
right,
Like
absolutely,
you don't immediately see rightly,
yeah,
So
yeah,
I
for
mean,
sure,
that's a perfect analogy for that. I think it was like, even though it's good and it's this experience, it might actually be a life-changing thing, but that doesn't mean that you're going to immediately understand the significance of it right away
absolutely, yeah.
or the implications of it. It's something that you're going to have to spend some time with.
There is just a little bit of I don't know, maybe it's something you grow into a wisdom about like knowing when to, because to your point, just because even though it maybe is disorienting to me and I don't know what it is, that doesn't mean that I shouldn't share it with you because maybe you already have that vision that you can share with me. But sometimes
Right.
maybe it's the exact opposite. Sometimes maybe the veil's pulled back for me and I see something, but you're not ready to see it. You know what I mean? So then I share it with you and and I'm only using me and you as just analogy,
Right. Yeah.
but maybe you're not ready to see it. So then you're going to push back on me and try to, like, I heard somebody kind of describe the whole cast your pearls before swine in that manner of like, not such derogatory. It could be like me and you, best friends, but like you haven't had that revelation yet. You haven't had that vision. So if I just rush to share that with you and you're not ready for that, then you're just going to trample on my pearls. You know what I mean? Like, so just, but it's that fine line of knowing like when to and when not to.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know.
Right.
I say that a lot on the show. I don't know.
Well, I think it's a good thing.
I think it is.
I think more of us should be saying that.
It's one of the things for sure that's come more prevalent in my life is that I think that the more I learn, the more educated I become, the more I study, the less I know.
Yeah.
And I'm open to that. I'm okay with that. It makes more sense now that I understand that I don't know.
Yeah. That kind of naturally brings up something else that I've been thinking about that I hadn't talked to you about much, but and I am sort of admittedly too hard on myself maybe,
Yeah.
but like I think that there is a real lack of dedication to, and I'm speaking about myself here. Like, even though I do put quite a bit of time into like thinking, studying, reading, things like that, like I don't think I do enough. And I feel like a lot of times I'm parroting more than I should, you
Yeah.
know? And like there is but I think that that's a problem with all of us. And
Probably.
but I do think that there is like it's but I think it's needed. I think that that sort of real attention to study to like you should probably read 10 books on a subject before you ever open your mouth about it. But we don't do that.
Well,
You know what I mean?
but see, and my initial reaction was to push back against that simply because a lot of times it's not until I verbalize it or have these conversations with you that think I realize where my logic is lacking or where, you know what I
Right. Yeah.
mean? So speak authoritatively on it, yes.
Yeah. And that's what I mean, I
Yeah, no.
guess. Yeah.
It's just yeah, because I mean, to that point, that's one of the whole reasons for that we do this, podcast. I've said to you before that I mean, the more listeners that we can get, great. I would love to be able to put more into the show, and by doing that, I mean, like, I would love to do this, be able to do something like this full time, to where I can dedicate my life to providing content and studying to provide better content and making myself more educated. And I would love to do that. But even if we get one viewer, I don't do it necessarily for the views. I do it because having these conversations with you help me,
Right.
So
Yeah.
having that, being able to talk through things. But yeah, to your point, yes, speaking authoritatively, which brings up a whole nother topic as far as like leadership and teaching other people, within
Right.
communities, which I don't know. That's a big topic, so I don't know that that's one that we even want to broach at this point, but I think it is something to consider as far as like, now that I'm thinking about it though, I don't know because I only have my limited life experiences, right? So we come from a small community. And I don't even mean our church, which our church is small, but I'm talking about just the community as a whole is small. So,
Right.
but even within that small community, we come from a small church background, and so yeah, there's a limited number of people. There are people that I mean, it's not a slight to say that like everybody that teaches or preaches or has a voice. Let's put it that way, is not educated, right? Like formally, none of us are really. I mean,
Right.
which is it makes it hard. I mean, it's a hard line to basically understand what you just said about needing to dedicate ourselves to that learning, but being forced into a position of leadership or whatever because there's nobody else to do
Right.
it. You know what
Yeah.
I mean?
Yeah.
So it's a hard thing. It's a
Yeah.
difficult thing.
Yeah. And so I think even more so that well, I don't know if I believe that or not.
Well, if you don't believe it, I'm glad you caught it before it came out of your mouth.
So like what I was gonna say is like maybe what's even more important than the actual putting in the study is the recognition of the need for it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But I don't know that I fully believe that anyway. I think that the study really is that important.
Yes.
But I do think at least like if you're going to be someone who is in that sort of leadership position, someone who is going to be teaching and
Cut. I was gonna say action, but
yeah.
that's
So we're back. We had to we had to, um the we just I stopped recording for some reason. Like so we had technical difficulties, stopped recording, and we've been recording for several minutes now that no one's going to hear because I am insistent
unless you're a Patreon, and then you can hear.
because I felt like that was a really good conversation we had going in the flow. It's like it's just gone now.
Yeah, it was the Satan.
You know what? That's very Pentecostal of you to say.
That's exactly where it came from.
It's a very
It
Pentecostal
came
thing
from
for
the
you to
deep
say.
recesses of my Pentecostal heart.
You got to get the devil out of the technology.
That's exactly what it was. We were just spitting truth, and he hates the truth. And it was
The devil's mad, and I'm glad.
exactly.
Hey, all right.
No, I really don't remember. I don't know,
I
man.
know I haven't. I cannot remember, and it's driving me banana sandwich. But you know what?
But
It is what
works,
it
huh?
is.
Works, yeah.
Yeah, we we are a long ways from works, aren't we?
Yeah, we are.
But yeah, I don't know, man. I don't know how much longer we want to go. I mean, I think that what we recorded was good. Man, I really do wish that I could remember what I said, but I'm just
Yeah,
not going to until I watch it back, I
I know.
guess.
And that's the bummer of this. So, we probably don't even have to tell the people this. They're going to know this on their own. But like for what we were saying when we were trying to get the recording back on was like we were really hoping that we didn't lose what we had recorded because going into this conversation, we didn't know what we were going to talk about. And if I'm just being honest about it, I didn't have very high hopes for it
Yeah, I didn't either.
because we didn't know what we were going to talk about. It seemed like it started off kind of slow. And then once we got going, I felt like the conversation was a really good conversation. So I
Yeah,
was going to be bummed if we lost the recording without it being saved. So I feel
yeah,
like we have a solid conversation to give to the people. I don't know how much more I have to say, about the stuff that we've talked about. I've got a lot to say about anything. So if we want to change
right.
topics or talk about something, if you got something else burning on your heart and mind, we can talk about that. But
No, I don't know. It was, you know, it's just all of this stuff has been stuff that I had, we had been. It's all the stuff that I've been thinking of just sort of naturally came up in the conversation tonight. So
it's pretty cool when that happens, ain't
yeah,
it? I find that to happen quite a bit actually with these pods and the conversations that we have. It just sort of naturally flows into. Even if we set out 3 weeks ahead of time, this is going to be the topic. It sort of always seems to flow into where my mind's at anyway, which is pretty kind of an interesting thing.
yeah. Hopefully that doesn't mean we're just forcing the things we want to talk about into the conversation.
And that's
But
possible too, but it doesn't feel forced.
yeah, yeah, I don't think so.
So yeah, I don't know, man. I do well. The one, it's now I'm gonna force it, I guess, because
Mhm.
because as you said, we were a long ways off of works, but there was a little bit of one thing I wanted to come back to on works that we didn't really touch, and I wanted to kind of hint on or hit, not hint, hit on, which is this idea because I know that there's and I don't know what to think about it, right? Like this balance between we already talked about the balance between like works not being a you're not you don't do works because you're compelled to do works because there's something that you need to do that makes yourself more acceptable or whatever, but we do them because we want to, right? Like I believe in the way of Jesus. I believe in the way of agape love, the putting others first, and I want to help people. I don't want to I'm not perfect about it, but I try to live my life from a place of I don't necessarily always make decisions based on what is good for me.
Right. Had to do it. Sorry.
That's
Go
right.
ahead.
But anyway, um, but I feel like there's this weird balance between knowing that and still striving for works because you like want to do more. And
Yeah.
I know that I've felt that before too. I've actually talked about it before. I think on the pod way like deep ago. But when I first started reading the Shane Claiborne, I don't even remember the book now. Which at the time it was like a earth shattering book for me, but it's been that long ago now.
Yeah.
I've read so many books between now and then, but you know what? I remember just reading his stuff and looking him up and seeing what he was doing, and just feeling like I'm not doing enough. Right? That was the initial impetus before me going to Honduras because I was like, I just want to do something. I feel like I'm not doing anything. I'm talking all the time about loving your neighbor and doing and
Right.
loving the other, but I'm not doing anything. Right?
Right.
So just this balance between striving and feeling like I'm not enough and I'm not doing enough, but like also not caring, you know?
Right.
There's this weird balance there that I don't really have the answers for, to be honest with you, because I think a lot of people have that struggle, I think. At least people that I've heard talk and that I've talked to that they have that struggle of I realize I'm not saved by my works and when I say that it's, I frame it from the perspective of I'm not more accepted by God because of the things I do.
Right.
God loves me regardless. But I feel like I need to be doing more. I feel like I'm not doing enough. There's more, like, really beating ourselves up on not doing enough, you know? And I don't know how we find that balance between. I'm not a good person to talk about balance. I'm not balanced in my fleshly life.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like when it's panned out for me in a lot of different ways, right? Like I'm not balanced in my running. I've run ultra marathons. You don't do that if you're balanced. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
like
Yeah.
because that's not my personality. So my tendency is to take things to their extreme. You know.
Yeah.
So when people struggle with this idea of conceptually understanding that my works aren't what saves me, but I still feel like I'm less than because I'm not doing enough. I'm real hard on myself because I'm not producing enough works. You know, like, and I don't.
Yeah.
I say all that unfortunately to say I don't have an answer. Like that's something I struggle with. I guess a little bit myself, if I'm being honest. You know,
Right. Yeah.
and I think it's a little bit of our flesh just getting in the way of like trying to force things because really like I don't know that there's any way to read the scriptures any other way other than like the gospel really is freedom. So if you feel restricted or if you feel burdened, right? His yoke is supposed to be easy. If it feels like a burden, then that's not him, right?
Right. Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. It is. It's a odd thing because like there is a. I, I think there is a need. So like even the word disciple means student, right?
Right.
Which implies like a that you have a teacher, and it also implies that your goal is to learn. And so I don't know that you can call yourself a disciple if you aren't doing things.
Yeah.
Like, so, like, I guess where my mind is going, like, I mean, and works can fall into a lot of different things, but
Right.
like, where my mind was going was like, with as far as like, oh, I have to pray X amount of
Right.
minutes or hours per day. I have to read so many scriptures per day or whatever, and like I have to do this and I have to do that, and like a lot of that can turn into works also, but like on the other hand, like there is a need for discipline, I think.
Right.
So like I think that like part of being a follower of Christ is to live a disciplined life. And and again, to your point, I'm not always the most disciplined in my everyday life. So like, that can have carryover
Right.
into your spiritual life also, but like I regardless of how I actually do it myself, I think it's important.
Yeah. I do think it's it kind of to me where my mind went with it was the whole and we kind of talked about this the last episode I think about the just accepting yourself where you're at. You know, I know I mentioned this in Wednesday night Bible study as far as like right now as of today, my max bench press is a little over 300 pounds. I can either get down on myself that I can't bench press 400 pounds and
Right.
like just try to force myself to be able to. So I start loading 400 pounds in the bar and just murdering myself,
Yeah.
which is going to end up with me hurt. And I'm never going to bench press 400 pounds. Or I can just accept where I'm at, get a good plan, and progress towards 400 pounds. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
it's just there's no problem. You know, we talked about it. I think it was last week that we talked about it as far as like the milk and the meat, right?
Yeah.
And like, there's no if you're on milk now, there's no. It's not. Shouldn't judge yourself for that. Just know that it's a requirement before the meat. Like you have to continue on that path. And like if you feel like your things aren't, if you're not satisfied with where you're at in your life, well, I don't think there's a problem with not being satisfied, but there's a problem with not with lacking the foresight to understand that like even though I'm not satisfied, I'm working towards that. Like
Right.
things are progressing towards that. I'm growing in my faith. I am putting it to your point. It takes discipline, right?
Right. Yeah.
I am going to try to pray even when I don't feel like it. even when
Yeah.
I don't understand why, right? To the I said I had questions about it. I
Right.
don't, even when I don't understand why, I'm going to do it. And I've
Yeah.
talked about either a couple episodes ago about reading, even when you don't feel like reading, and when
Yeah.
you feel like you're not even getting anything out of it because you are. You don't. You just read. Just do it. Like
Yeah.
that's discipline.
Right.
Doing it when you don't feel like doing it.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
and just continue to do those things, and like you will progress to where you on down the path, I guess is all I'm trying to say. So I
Right.
think there comes a
But there is work in
yes,
that.
there
Yeah.
is work in
Yeah.
that. But I think our tendency, my point is that we tend to become overwhelmed with it. We're not at a finished product right now. As I exist today, I could be doing more of this. I should be doing more to help the poor. I should be doing this. I should be more active in my church. I should be reading my Bible more. I should. No, you can't live your life from a should or you're not going to get anywhere. Again, going
Yeah.
back to the bench press thing, I could say I've been training since I was 16 years old. I should be bench pressing 600 pounds by now. But the reality is, I bench press 300.
Right.
You know what I mean? And I've
Yeah.
just got to accept that. And if I want to progress my strength, I've got to continue where I'm at. I've got to accept where I'm at and then plan forward, not just become bogged down in the fact that I'm not where I think I should be?
Right.
So,
Yeah.
anyway, it's a bit of a tangent, but it's something that is, I think it's practical, man, because it's got to be practical.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that all of that is, I mean, we set out initially earlier this week to talk about works. I mean, that's definitely part of it.
Yeah.
I think all of that's worth saying for sure.
I think it's probably something that a lot of people struggle with if there's somebody who's in church and somebody who understands that, like, we don't work because we're compelled to, but we want to. But even when I say I want to, I'm still don't do it to the extent that I feel like I need to, which is just a weird conundrum because you don't feel like you need to, but then you feel like you're not doing it enough.
Right.
You're not doing as much as you need to. It's just weird. Welcome to being a human. It's weird.
Right. Yeah.
So, anyway.
Along with Deja Vu, which I don't remember where we decided to cut this whole, there was like a whole 6 minutes of nonsensory that
Yeah.
we're cutting out.
I had deja vu. My mind was blown. So you're talking to a man with a shattered mind right now.
Mm.
So
Yeah. It'd be like that.
I'm not somebody that has deja vu all that often, but when I do, it seems like it's like whoa, like it's intense deja vu.
Yeah.
Like the one that I had down here a few minutes ago felt like I like timelines literally crossed. I don't know how to explain it any other way, man. It was like
Yeah.
it was real. It felt so real.
Yeah. I've had those before too. It is interesting,
It
isn't
it literally may have been the most intense deja vu I've ever had in my entire life.
it?
I've been alive for 38 years.
Hmm. Well,
So,
that is interesting. It does make you wonder, like, anytime I think about deja vu, I always think about, like, the Christ gospel teaching that we grew up with.
it means you're in the right place at the right time or something like that.
Right.
You're where you're supposed to be.
Yeah. Which is like, that's part of that's comforting. But then, like, w- why didn't, if I'm where I'm supposed to be right now, why didn't I have deja vu?
Right, because you're here with me.
Right. If you're where you're supposed to be, then am I not where I'm supposed to be?
Well, it's if your wheel's not right, then no.
Well,
I was trying to get in the mind frame of someone who would be an apologist for it.
right.
That's one of and this is maybe a separate topic on its own. That's one of the weird things about something like Christ's gospel. For our history, we don't talk absolutes a lot, but we have mentioned Christ's gospel by name a few times because it's a big part of both of our
Yeah.
histories. That's one of the interesting things about it is when you leave something like that that's so. Well, there was a word that came to mind, but I'm not going to use it. There, but it's so yeah, it's so as it was. Let's just say that. Let those with ears to hear, let them hear it. No, those who were in it will know. No, um, but there's something about it that
I'm just gonna quietly drink my water over here. You say whatever you want to say.
I was just being silly. I didn't. I mean,
I know.
I was
I'm
literally.
being silly too.
I was literally just being silly about it. Like the whole point of what I'm trying to actually say is that it's kind of funny that like when you leave something like that that's so intense, let's just say it that way, so intense.
Yeah.
And you're especially when you're somebody like me, when your natural reaction is to like swing from this side all the way over to this side,
Right.
to like acknowledging that there's a lot of things wrong with the theology of Christ's gospel, in my opinion, just my opinion. But then also there's always that recalibration of like, although I disagree with a whole lot of stuff, and actually probably the core stuff, there is some stuff that's worth gleaning from there that like is pretty good stuff too, which I think kind of comes back to that whole like everybody's a guru if you've got the ears to hear it, like kind of.
Yeah.
I think that we have a natural tendency to, or I say we, again, it's me. It is me, always me. I have the natural tendency to like swing so far away that I want to reject everything that came from that other side.
Right.
Whereas like I don't think that's healthy either. Like there's some good stuff. There's stuff that needs to be gleaned from it. It's being able to glean the good stuff while letting the tares be burned away.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And I find myself a lot with some of that, with some of their teachings in specific. Like there's a lot of that stuff that I find extremely harmful, extremely terrible, like very shallow theologically. But there's also some good stuff. Like there's some stuff that's worth gleaning as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I think so. Yeah.
Which all that was just to say, like maybe the deja vu thing, that actually is one of those things where it's like, to your point, like why didn't you have it too? I don't know, but you're where you're where the timelines really did cross. You really are where you should be at that point. I don't know, maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if we leave it that simple, I think it can make sense. There's just so much more that goes into it.
Yeah.
But which gets weird for me.
Yeah, that's not really how I conceptualized deja vu, but what made me think of it was because you said there's something comforting in that, and I was like, it just made me realize it's something that I've thought about a little bit specifically with my past in the Christ Gospel, denomination was like there is some stuff that probably I shouldn't just write off as much as I do just because it's part of my past, even though that there are a lot of harmful things involved in it. Like again, if I'm going to truly believe and preach and teach that there's everybody's a guru if they got ears to hear it, if I've got ears to hear it, then I've got to do the same for them. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah. Yeah.
so anyway.
Yeah. Well, now I want to say more things about deja vu.
Do it.
I don't know.
I haven't really thought that much about deja vu because I told you I don't have it that often, so I don't have that many thoughts really. I don't know I just don't know what to think about it.
Well, like I was just thinking about it from like the Christ Gospel perspective is kind of what I'm
Oh, okay.
not sure if I want to talk about or not. Just because there's a lot that's tied into it that like if it's if that base level thing that we've already talked about, like this is confirmation that you're where you're supposed to be in your journey. Like that itself could make sense to me, but the reasoning given behind it doesn't make sense to me. And I don't know if you even
I don't.
remember any of that,
No, I don't.
but
That's why I was looking at you that way, not because I disagreed. It's because I don't even know what that means.
like you're gonna have to elaborate on
Yeah.
that. Yeah. I mean, so the way the way I remember it, the way I understood it was that essentially everyone existed in seed form.
Yeah, I remember that.
So we pre-existed, which is a formal heresy actually, the pre-existence of souls. But anyway, we all pre-existed and we were shown our life before it. Like it was kind of like God was like, all right, buddy, this is the life you're going to live. Shake on it. And like we agreed to come and live this life. And so deja vu is like confirmation that you're living out because you've seen it played out before. It's like you're remembering something you've already seen before because God showed you your life. He laid out your life before you
Yeah.
chose to come and take on a body.
Yeah, I do remember this now.
And so then all of that is also tied into, though, like the problem of evil, because you have people that, like, somewhere in the world right now, there's a child who was born with some sort of like disease that they came into this life and their entire existence has been pain and suffering,
Right.
and they're gonna die at a young age. Somewhere in the world, that's the reality for some one person.
Yeah.
And so the whole thing was like, yeah, you chose to live this life. And so it's almost like that's a some sort of an explanation for the problem of evil.
It's an out. Yeah.
But then,
Yeah, that's tragic, but you agreed to it. So,
right. But the problem in that is that, well, I think there's a lot of problems with it, but the my current biggest problem with that is that that assumes that everything that happens, including evil and suffering, is God's will.
yeah, absolutely.
And I don't believe that.
Well, even whenever you first started explaining it and it hadn't clicked with me, because now that you've explained it, I do remember that. Yes. But
Yeah.
before, even when you very first started, I was like, well, then so they don't believe in free will. I get like the only way that makes sense, even the whole idea of like you are where you're supposed to be is like, well, then
Right.
how, so that means there is a predetermined
Right. Yeah.
determinism about things, right? Like,
Right. Which, if you then believe in, you know, hell as
which
eternal conscious torment, then
the only way I think you can believe in that sort of predeterminism is if things worked out perfectly, right? Like I don't know how you can explain away, like even in this idea of like, well, yeah, you're suffering, but you agreed to that. Well, like, well, why? But you're God. Why?
right.
Why was that even an option? If it's
Yeah.
all predetermined,
Right.
if there's a determinism to it,
Right.
that makes no sense to me. You know?
Yeah. And so I remember one thing that was said about that was like, so that you could stand up as a witness for those who rejected Christ. Like somewhere in the world, there's someone who has lived a crappy existence
Yeah.
and they reject God because of it. And there's someone else that's lived a similar crappy existence that chose God, that chose to, with their free will, that
Yeah.
chose to believe God. And so now that person can stand and say, well, look at this crappy life I had. What'd you expect? And then the other person can come along and say, well, but I had the same crappy life, man, and I still chose. And then they're therefore making their excuse invalid.
What did they choose? Anyway. Yeah.
Anyway, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Well,
I mean, I don't know if we want to keep any of that either. It was just
I
musings about
don't
a
believe
former life.
I don't believe any of that. Let me formally say that.
But but going back to the beginning, like I do think that there is something appealing about that very basic thing about like this sort of being just like confirmation that like, hey buddy, you're where you're supposed to be.
Yeah.
Like there is something that is comforting about that, but the explanation for all of it has so many problems, at least as I've understood it, has so many problems for me theologically that like
Right.
I I can't go there.
That's
Can't get behind it.
it's actually one of that's why I like talking about the deja vu on this show is it's going to be hard for me is because it's one of those things that I have a hard time making sense of theologically, but
Right.
like there's a lot of other theories that make deja vu make a lot like more sense, I guess, like with like simulation theories or, multiple dimensions and um like I've used the phrase a couple of times in reference to it, like timelines crossing, where it's like just the multiple dimensions of, sort of like that point in time being an axis to where like multiple iterations happened at the same time. I don't know. So, but none of that I don't think works out from the perspective of classical Christianity. So,
Well, maybe.
maybe.
I don't know, because I don't know what you mean by all that, but like what it made me think of was like maybe in a sense the way that I understand the whole reconciliation, universal reconciliation thing. Like there being like maybe there are certain points along this path that are pivotal points
Mm,
in your that are eternal points, ones that like because like there's because sort of the way I can am sort of conceptualizing those evil, let's just go back to the evil thing, right, and the suffering thing. Like God, to me, God's not done with those things. God did not create or like predestine, foreordain that suffering in the evil that's in this world, but he intends to make it right. He intends to bring his will, because that's not his will. It's
right.
not his will that any should perish, right? It's not his will that any of this evil and this suffering that happens in our world, it's not his will. That in fact is evidence that God's will is not being done on earth as it is in heaven, which is why we pray in the first place. Let your kingdom come and let your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. We pray that because God's will isn't always being done on earth as it is in heaven. So what is heaven? I think that maybe those moments are an experience of that heaven. It's these are important waypoints maybe that we're getting a glimpse of eternity, perhaps,
Yeah, I don't know.
which would include maybe that. I mean, it depends on what you think heaven is or the finished work. Like in whatever, if there is a point in time in which all of this is wrapped up and everything is made right, whatever that looks like, it's probably some other reality, right? It's a new heaven and a new earth, right? It's some sort of new dimension, other dimensions. It's something other, which would be holy, right? If it's other, it's holy.
Other, right? Set apart.
So
Yeah. Did you just make that up, or did you hear that from somebody else?
what?
All that.
Everything I just said? No, it just came to me right now.
I thought so.
I mean, I don't know. That probably means that it's nonsense, but
No, actually, that means like I could tell that that was something that was like something that you had thought about, like that was it was a thought. It wasn't, you weren't just parroting something that you had heard somebody else say, but like you had thought about this, or maybe it was a divine inspiration within you. I don't know, but I enjoyed it. I like it.
yeah,
I could tell.
thanks.
I could tell, and I liked it. It was good.
Thank you, sir.
So
Yeah, praise be he,
praise
right?
be to He. Yeah.
What's the TGBTG? I had to spell it out of my head.
To God be the
God be the glory.
Yeah. Well,
You ready to wrap up, dude?
I'm good, man.
All
Think
right, then.
I'm actually surprisingly pleased with this one.
Yeah, I know. I thought it was going to be a stinker. I thought it was going to be one of those.
Stinker from the sphincter.
That was the wrong button.
You should always know better than to count us out. You know what? You should always know better than to count us out. We don't do stinkers here.
You
We
would think I would learn.
You would think. We only do good stuff here.
Slapping in the stinkers? All right.